Felicitous greetings, fellow fanatics. Welcome back, one and all. I'm Fanatic, and today we're taking a look at Age of Mythology and its expansion, The Titans, a mythical spin-off of Ensemble Studios' Age of Empires series. Before we get started though, what's your favorite film or game based off of classical mythology? As for myself, I'd actually have to say Hallmark's adaptation of the Odyssey. Yes, there was a time that they did something other than poorly written rom-coms that happened to take place at Christmas, and it was actually pretty good. But without further distractions, let's take a look. At its heart, Age of Mythology is a pretty standard RTS, and if you're at all familiar with the Age of Empires games, you'll immediately feel right at home. You have four primary resources you have to harvest: food, wood, gold, and divine favor. Food can be obtained by hunting wild animals, raising and slaughtering livestock, or by growing and maintaining farms. Gold can be obtained by mining ore veins, and later in the game by setting up trade caravans. And finally, wood is obtained by, what else, chopping down trees and harvesting them for lumber. Divine favor works differently for each of the different cultures you can play as, so we'll touch on that in a little bit. In true RTS fashion, you'll spend most of the early game by getting your economy up and running. And then depending on your playstyle, you may wish to rush your opponent while their military is still weak, or you can choose to sit back and defend as you ready a more powerful force. Units are often more or less effective against certain types of units. Some are particularly good against infantry, and others against cavalry. Heroes are always strong against myth units, while siege units are obviously meant to destroy enemy structures. As with the rest of the Age of Empires series, key technological advances will be locked behind different ages. In the standard skirmish game, everyone begins in the Archaic Age, and by spending a sufficient amount of food and gold, you can upgrade to the next age, progressing to the Classical, Heroic, and finally Mythic ages, with each age giving you access to units, structures, and upgrades to research for those that you already have. Beyond that, each age gives you access to a god power that you can use once per match, but to fully explain that, we first have to explain the game's playable factions. In the base game, you have three primary factions: the Greeks, the Egyptians, and the Norse. Each faction is further divided into three sub-factions, each representing a different primary god that they'll worship. For example, if playing as the Greeks, you'll begin a standard game by choosing between Zeus, Poseidon, or Hades as your major deity. The one you choose will give you certain advantages right out of the gate. For example, Zeus gives you the Bolt power, which can instantly destroy a single unit. Hades, on the other hand, has Sentinels, which allows you to create living statues to protect a town center. Beyond that, as you advance in age, you'll be able to choose different minor gods to worship. If you chose Zeus as your major deity, then you'll be able to choose between Athena and Hermes for the classical age, whereas Hades will instead have access to either Athena or Ares. Again, each minor deity gives access to different units, upgrades, and a unique god power, so choosing which one to worship going into a new age will have a major effect on your playstyle for the rest of the match. Bear in mind that in campaign mode, your major deity will be chosen for you, and you may begin in the second or third age for certain missions, in which case those minor deities will also be chosen automatically. Aside from their various gods, each faction has a number of things that separate them from one another. Every faction has a temple that produces myth units, but they each produce divine favor in a different way. The Greeks simply task villagers to worship at their temples. The more villagers worshipping, the faster favor is generated. Every faction has access to hero units, but how they're produced is different. In the case of the Greeks, they get access to a small handful of unique heroes that can be trained at villages, such as Odysseus, Chiron, or Hippolyta. You may only have one instance of each hero at a time, but they can be retrained at your town center if they fall in battle. Next up, we have the Egyptians. The Egyptians are a heavily gold-focused faction. Most buildings and units will require more gold than other factions do. Rather than having villagers pray at temples, they instead worship by building monuments which passively generate favor. You can build up to 5 monuments in total, with each one costing more than the last. Egyptians have two types of heroes. Priests are relatively weak in combat against anything other than myth units, but have the ability to heal nearby units when not fighting. But you'll also have access to a powerful pharaoh. You can only have one pharaoh at a time, but if he should die, his son will rise to take his place shortly thereafter. The pharaoh is a powerful unit in combat, but can also be used to bolster your economy. He can oversee construction to make workers build faster, or make them harvest resources more quickly. Thirdly, we have the Norse. The Norse are probably the most unique of the three base game factions. Firstly, they have two types of villagers, neither of which can build structures. Regular villagers should be used to harvest food and wood, whereas dwarves are faster when tasked with mining gold. Additionally, they have access to ox carts. Whereas Greek and Egyptian drop-off points are static buildings, ox carts can move along with your workers and reposition themselves anywhere on the map. As aforementioned, villagers do not build structures for the Norse. Rather, infantry units double as builders. They also have arguably the simplest way of gaining divine favor. You simply have to keep fighting. Whenever a Norse player is engaged in combat, they're generating favor. This encourages them to constantly be on the offensive. This does bring us to the only hero unit available to the Norse, the Hersir. They're a pretty standard infantry unit, but generate favor faster than other units, and like all heroes, have a bonus against myth units. And finally, if you're playing with the Titans expansion, you'll also have access to the Atlantean civilization. Atlantis has powerful citizen units rather than your typical villagers. These harvest resources faster than other factions and don't have to take their resources to a drop-off point. They're significantly more expensive, but arguably the trade-offs are more than worth it. Atlantis produces a trickle of favor automatically, which becomes stronger as they control more town centers. As such, maps with fewer town centers tend to place them at a disadvantage. The Atlanteans do not produce dedicated hero units. Rather, any human unit can be upgraded into a hero for a price, enhancing all their abilities, especially against myth units. And finally of note is the fact that many of the god powers available to Atlantis are weaker than their opposing counterparts, but may be used multiple times. When playing standard skirmish games, there are two final points to keep in mind. First are Titan Gates, which any player can build once they reach the Mythic Age. This allows you to summon a Titan, which acts as a super unit. It's not invincible, but it deals heavy damage to all targets. They're still considered myth units with all the strengths and weaknesses thereof. Thus, large numbers of heroes can be especially effective against them. Finally, you also have the option of building an expensive wonder structure. After a wonder is completed, a countdown will begin. If you can protect your wonder until it expires, you'll automatically win the game regardless of what else is happening on the map. Like many RTS games, Age of Mythology features a robust single-player campaign with 32 levels, and the Titans expansion acts as a sequel with another 12. Each level has a unique map where you begin with different situations. Some are just basic build your base and overcome the enemy sort of missions, whereas others are a bit more unique. We begin with Arkantos, an admiral of Atlantis and devout worshipper of Poseidon who has been sent to fight in the Trojan War. The first leg of the campaign retells the familiar events of the Aeneid. However, after the fall of Troy, we then follow Arkantos on his own adventure. Although Age of Mythology is fairly light on plot, there is enough there to warrant a spoiler warning. If you wish to avoid spoilers, please jump ahead to the time coordinates indicated on screen. Initiate temporal distortion now. Still with me? Then don't say I didn't warn you. After rescuing Helen from Troy, Arkantos intends to make his way back to Atlantis. However, he soon finds himself detoured as they come across a Cyclops named Gargarensis who has taken over a village. Aided by the centaur Chiron, Arkantos and his men chase the Cyclops into the bowels of the underworld, where it's found that he's attempting to open a path to Tartarus in order to free the Titan King Kronos. Arkantos and the others manage to destroy the giant ram that's being used to break down the door, but Gargarensis brags about there being other entrances to Tartarus that he can open. He then causes an earthquake, attempting to entrap Arkantos and the others. This forces them to find another way to leave the underworld. Eventually, this leads them to 3 temples representing the Olympian brothers, but as Arkantos prays to Poseidon, his prayer is rejected. Instead, it is Zeus that hears his plea, creating an ethereal stairway to carry him and his army back to the surface world. Zeus's passage brings them to the lands of Egypt, where a mercenary captain named Amonra is already fighting against Gargarensis' forces. Amonra reveals that the second underworld gate is at the base of the Great Pyramid, with the worshippers of Set also working to revive Kronos. Amonra informs the others that she's working to gather the pieces of Osiris, who will bar the way to the underworld from Set and his followers, and this makes up the majority of the next leg of the campaign. However, along the way, Arkantos has a dream in which Athena speaks to him, revealing Gargarensis' plan as well as Poseidon's betrayal. Poseidon has grown jealous of Zeus and intends to take over Olympus once the Titans have been freed. And I must say, it's surprisingly refreshing to not have Hades be the villain for once. Far too often do films and games based off of Greek mythology want to portray Hades as this Satan-like character, and it's actually quite a relief to see that this game avoids this widely overused misconception. All the same, once Arkantos awakens, it's time for them to resume their quest, eventually bringing the pieces of Osiris to the Great Pyramid, where he sends the followers of Set fleeing in terror and seals the second Tartarus gate, ensuring that Kronos will not revive there. Unfortunately, there's still a third gate to deal with. Along with Poseidon and Set, Loki has likewise sided with the Titans, being given similar promises of power if Kronos is freed. Thus, it's up to the heroes to venture forth to Midgard in order to close the third underworld gate. Wait a minute, Midgard? Isn't that just what they called Earth? As in the entire planet, not just the Nordic regions. Regardless, your quest will require you to rally the Viking lands to your cause, eventually leading you to another underworld passage. Chiron sacrifices himself to let the others reach the gate, but their task is not yet complete. In order to seal the gate, they must reconstruct Mjolnir. You never actually see Thor in the same manner as Osiris, but as soon as it's completed, he uses it to close the third gate. Gargarensis is at long last captured and slain, and everyone begins to head their own ways to return home. However, upon reaching the shores of Atlantis, Arkantos finds that the war against the Titan worshippers is not yet over. The Gargarensis he killed was a fake, the real one now laying siege to Atlantis itself, where the final Tartarus gate is now undefended. He first has to focus on rescuing the citizens of Atlantis, and after that, the final battle comes, wherein Arkantos must mount a massive siege to his own home city. In order to contend with the direct interference of Poseidon, Zeus grants Arkantos divinity, making him into a demigod to contend with a statue of Poseidon that is now attempting to open the gate. After a long, hard-fought battle, Arkantos destroys the statue, with its trident falling upon Gargarensis as it collapses. Although Arkantos has managed to stop them from freeing Kronos, the war between the gods causes the island to collapse into the sea, thus sinking Atlantis once and for all. Thus ends the original campaign. Before going into the Titans expansion, I should briefly mention the Golden Gift. This is a free downloadable mini expansion that adds 4 levels that act as a prequel to the Norse section of the campaign. I don't feel it's worth going into a separate section just for the mini campaign, but if you want a few extra levels, make sure you give them a download. The Titans expansion acts as a sequel, taking place 10 years after the original campaign and focusing on Arkantos' son, Castor. The first half of the campaign involves Castor being tricked into releasing the Titans. We see Ajax and Amonra return, the latter of which is now Queen of Nubia, but the way it plays out is, frankly, quite annoying. The Age of Empires titles have never had amazing storytelling, but apparently, Arkantos can manifest as a demigod to warn Ajax and Amonra that his son has been tricked. But for some reason or another, he can't appear before Castor himself to warn him not to go down this path, and this is never addressed or explained within the campaign. Regardless, the second half of the campaign is obviously about defeating the Titans that have been unleashed, first in Egypt and the Nordic lands, and then returning to Greece to defeat Prometheus and Kronos. Each has to be defeated in a different way, with all of them in the campaign being immune to the standard strategies to take down a Titan. As a rule of thumb, most of the time you'll have to call upon the strength of a similarly powerful creature to do battle with one of the Titans, with the final battle against Kronos only winnable by having Gaia fight against him. And it just goes to show that no matter what, even if you're the big bad king of the Titans, you're never too old to be afraid of your mother's wrath.
Adam, are you using my dining table for Gloomhaven again? Are you using my good candlesticks as torches? Adam!
And that goes double for mortals like myself. Welcome back, Chrononauts. You're just in time to join us for the conclusion. All in all, Asian Mythology holds up as a solid spin-off. Although the graphics are obviously quite dated at this point, the cinematics make good use of the limited models, and there's a lot of variety put into the various units so you can clearly tell what everything is. The gameplay is quite solid, holding true to the Age of Empires model while still having enough new to the game to make it feel like something unique. I have heard complaints about it not being as suitable for multiplayer, but frankly, I don't think every RTS has to be. The campaign gives a wide variety of levels with different goals, and the various gods give you a number of different playstyles to explore with each faction. The story is fairly weak overall, but I was having so much fun with the various missions that, in the end, I really just didn't care. It was a blast to play through all the same. It's not my favorite RTS, but I'll probably come back to it at some point in the future. In conclusion, I find Age of Mythology to be worthy of a respectable 8.4 out of 10. If you're interested in purchasing and playing Age of Mythology, then you'll find that it's actually pretty easy to get off of sites like eBay or Amazon and not expensive at all these days. It still runs quite well on Windows 10, the only hiccups I had were some minor issues with the cutscenes. Alternatively, you can also purchase Age of Mythology Extended Edition off of Steam, which also includes the option to purchase a second expansion introducing the Chinese civilization. However, if you're going that route, you may want to wait a little while. They've recently announced Age of Mythology Retold. There haven't been any real details yet, but judging from the name, it's very likely to be a full remake. But regardless, what about you? What do you think of Age of Mythology? What mythology-themed video games do you enjoy? If you have any questions, remarks, or opposing points of view, leave them in the comments down below. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and ring that bell. If you really enjoy my work, please consider funding my channel on Patreon. Until next time, farewell, fellow fanatics. Thank you again for watching. I have plenty more to share with you if you're interested. You can click up here above my head to subscribe to my channel. You can click over here on my monitor to see the most recent video that I've worked on. Or if you prefer, you can click up here to open this mysterious vault and see what video that the YouTube algorithm has picked just for you.